Welcome to the Mac and Main Show. Jack Main, Steve McAvoy, and then special guests. Professor Trip Sanders is here to talk about business in sports. Guys, it is Monday, May 11th. We are recording on the day of the drop so we can get as current as we possibly can. Quarantine's going well. We're like 4 days away from the stay-at-home order officially ending, but you still have to practice social distancing. Steve, how's things going right now in Long Island?
So I went golfing for the first time in about a month and a half, which is nice. It was very windy. It was supposed to be the day that we were supposed to have this huge snowstorm. So much for that. So I ended up going golfing at 9 a.m. I walked 6 hours of a golf course and realized that I am way too out of shape to function. Only to figure out that they do have golf carts available, and I just completely whiffed on that. So, I mean, hey, it was a good workout, but everything's going pretty well. Trip, how you doing?
I can never complain. My wife had a great Mother's Day yesterday.
Awesome.
Hope you guys remember to tell your moms as well and do something nice for them yesterday.
Of course.
Absolutely.
The sun was out today for a little while, then it went away, and now it's storming. But, that rain will not dampen my spirits because theoretically we just got really great news about the MLB and possibly even professional football today. So you can see me wearing my Eagles hat. The NCAA is a different story, but yes, I know you guys can boo whenever you want to, but I really, frankly, don't care. So.
Well, I had Professor Sanders in SB 101 this past semester. This is kind of like an intro to business course. I am a business minor. Steve, of course, is a business management major, and he is going to be going into that field post Quinnipiac career. He is doing his master's in sports journalism next year. I am, of course, majoring in journalism, so business is kind of my fallback option. But this is the man. I got to figure out which way to point. It's backwards in Zoom. This man right here is the guy who is going to be able to guide us in the right direction in terms of helping out the Mac and Main show. He's going to help us kind of understand how businesses can start to get back on their feet, including in the sports industry, which is where we like to talk. So, Professor or Trip, first of all, we got to hear the reason on why they call you Trip. And then also kind of like your backstory, your company, and what it is that you do. A, for the school, and then B, for your in your personal life.
Got it. Perfect. First of all, thanks guys for having me be a part of the show today. I can't tell you how excited I am to participate, talk sports. So my given name is Whitney Albert Sanders III. My grandfather and father both have the same name. So I'm the third in line. Therefore, my nickname is given to me as Trip, as in 1, 2, 3 trip, like triple. So, and just growing up who I was, I'm much more of a Trip than a Whitney, so I prefer to go by my nickname Trip. And all my students, I encourage them once class is completed that they refer to me as that, but in class, it has to be Professor Sanders. So and Jack, you've heard this story many times. Steve, you're hearing it for the first time. My passion is to help people understand what their passion is in business. So I teach entrepreneurship classes, career development, and SB 101. And what that allows me to help is for people to figure out what they really love to do. And I just try to point them in that direction to find an outlet, a job, an occupation that will allow them to continue that passion beyond Quinnipiac. Outside of that, I also own my own business. It's a small business called Networking Simple. I help companies, owners, and their employees maximize every networking opportunity that they come across through seminars, coaching, in-person event representation, and also just introductions that I help them make. And then they gain productive business relationships from those introductions. So some people call it marketing. I call it networking or business development, and I do it because I love it. And I started this business about 10 years ago, have not worked a day since. And that's what I hope for all of you meaning every Quinnipiac student I come into contact with. Clearly, you guys are pursuing your passion right now with this sports show, so keep up the great work. I've listened to about 10 of them so far, and it's hilarious to listen that some of your points of view are way off, and I'm happy to correct them today. But clearly, you guys have a passion for this, and you're pursuing exactly what you want to do, and I could not be happier for you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We are super excited. Make sure that you guys follow us on Twitter at Mac and Maine, like us on Facebook, and then you can find this episode at 7 p.m. every Monday night on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube while we are in quarantine. So without further ado, you mentioned it here when we were in the before we started recording, that we got some great news in terms of sports returning in America. Major League Baseball just approved a startup plan to get their season going in mid-July.
Correct. However, here's a caveat. The Players Association has not approved it yet.
Yes, the Players Association must approve.
So I know we will talk about all aspects of business in sports. And one thing that we will learn, or that we all know, is just because somebody says something or puts it out there does not mean that's going to happen, because there are other sides that don't want that to happen, especially in that context. So the Players Association is like, hold the phone. We haven't even brokered what salaries are going to look like. I mean, there's so many implications that a truncated season is. The only comparison that we have is the strike shortened seasons of years past, where it was an abbreviated regular season, a regular playoffs, and the World Series was decided by the regular amount of playoff games. But the point being is that there's a lot of differing opinions on how this is going to be rolled out. So while it's excellent news, and as baseball fans, plus you guys don't know this, you can't see this on the radio, but this is my spring training Phillies cup. That is my good luck cup that I use for all time. And that's where I think a lot of the regular season games are going to end up taking place.
In the spring training facilities?
Correct. Even though part of the article said that they wanted to have them back at their home stadium, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, in my opinion, especially from a business standpoint. So a lot of these, I'm trying to take the approach of looking at it objectively from a dollars and cents perspective. So however all of these announcements come out, and I know we're jumping way ahead here, and I apologize for that. But one thing that keeping all the teams close together during COVID-19 is probably the better option, to keep them down in Arizona and in Florida, so they're close. They can get to each other's stadiums relatively easily, that they can play, like some of the options have been talked about, double headers and get a lot of those games in on the same day, or double the games in on the same day. It has some advantages. So, and that's where the players' union is absolutely going to push back. Because think about that. How many games lost will a player have if he's unable to be penciled in the lineup for the doubleheader? Or how many more innings is the pitcher going to lose if they're, if they play doubleheaders 3 times a week? Do they now pitch on 3 days rest instead of 5? Think about all those different possibilities could be.
And so what's interesting about all this, and I kind of want to take a step back and kind of go over what has already occurred. So what we already know, a few weeks ago on the show, we talked about how the MLBPA has already essentially worked alongside the owners and the league to say that eligibility counts for the year, contracts will be paid. So everyone's going to get the year of eligibility. They're all going to get their work in and get their money, depending on, regardless of how long the season is, if it even happens. Because as of right now, we're waiting. It's probably going to be in the next 48 hours. We're going to find out what the MLBPA finally decides on. But we have the original thought that was going to be everyone was going to be held in Arizona. They were going to play on college fields, spring training facilities, and then the Diamondbacks at Chase Field were going to have like the marquee stadium at once every so often. But you bring up an interesting point now, because they're the biggest pushback from the MLBPA was the idea of, we're not ready. Pitchers have been able to kind of run bullpens. I know Marcus Stroman of the Mets was doing a whole thing down in Key West where he used his pier. That was barely enough space to even pitch. But what's interesting is that the pitchers aren't ready. The hitters, even though they've been practicing, it's only really been simulated. They haven't been in-game situations. We still have to have a month-long spring training. So if we're going to start in July, we're technically not really going to be playing baseball until August, if anything, because they're going to want a month. Or do we start in June? A lot of these things are still kind of up in the air. But how will, in terms of the business side of things, this will be my actual question up to you, is with the fact that we're going to have a shortened season, they're only going to look at literally half of the year, probably 80 games, 72 to 80 games. In terms of the finances, you might not necessarily play in your home stadium. They want to, but at the same time, what's the difference between playing spring training as opposed to at home, considering it's just dimensions and no one's going to be there anyways, so there's going to be no money flowing. So where do we look financially of why should we go to spring training facilities? Why should we go to our home stadiums? Obviously, Arizona and Florida splitting time, it's easier for travel. But what are the nuances that we're not really thinking about?
So cost implications from an operation standpoint, and as a sports management major, you should know this quite well, Steve. There are fixed costs everywhere that you go. So a stadium has operating costs. You got to mow the grass, you got to maintain the field, you got to fix up the stadium, those kinds of things. But when there's no fans coming, no customers, you don't have to run concessions, you don't have to run parking, you don't have to worry about all the accessory stuff that you would need to do for fans and customers. So that eliminates a lion's share of the cost, but also most of the revenue. However, and I was just looking this up the other day, there's this great website called Statista. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. It talks about the percentage of revenue that leagues generate off of ticket gate sales, and which is just tickets only. And then also calculates concessions, sponsorships, TV rights. I mean, it's astronomical. And here's where the MLB is doing relatively okay relative to other big major sports. It only derives about 30% off of ticket sales of its total revenue and that's about $3 billion. That's right. Billion with a B that it generates off of ticket sales. Now, it's survivable because they'll, and they're losing money on not selling hot dogs and beer and all those other things too that they, upcharge you for out the wazoo. However, a majority of their revenue comes from television rights. So that's closer to 40 or 50% of their revenue. I mean, it's astronomical. And because the MLB is revenue sharing, meaning it's flat across the league of, the Kansas City Royals make just as much as the New York Yankees in TV broadcasting rights. So they'll be just fine. Those, I don't worry about MLB teams being solvent long-term. So they can weather, a season like this where they're not collecting any ticket sales. But it's the other, and they'll be pushing merchandise sales online like crazy. Oh, yeah. So, and that's why you might see some additional new agent signings so they can sell new jerseys that's why the Dodgers are psyched, so they can get Mookie Betts and all of his jersey sales that all the former Red Sox fans are going to go out and buy, right? And it's, just ways that an organization might try to generate some additional income off of, this uncertain time that everybody's business has been either majorly impacted financially or completely flattened. Like when you're talking about smaller businesses like mine. So don't feel bad for Major League Baseball teams. They have so much money that they're going to be just fine. So that's one thing that, Jacob Resnick, who's been on the show a couple times, and he has expressed his opinion about how major league owners hoard
obscene amount of money and then don't pay it back to the minor leaguers that are now getting cut from their major league affiliates. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. But I think one thing that the MLBPA needs to keep in mind is that everybody has the same goal here. The fans, MLB, and the PA, everybody wants baseball to be played in some way, shape, or form. I don't really care. As a fan, I don't really care if this season doesn't count towards a World Series championship. I just want to see the Red Sox go out and play 5 times a week, double headers. I don't really care. I just want to see baseball happen in America. So what do you see MLB or the MLBPA making more compromises to see a season happen?
So first of all, I don't think you'll see a season not end with a championship. Players and clubs and fans even would say, well, what are these, just a bunch of exhibitions? So I think you'll have to see it end I don't think you'll ever see it just as like a spring training and then, oh, sorry, we're going to make it stop.
Well, yeah, but what I'm seeing is, like, whoever wins the World Series, they're going to win a World Series playing half a season. There's a big asterisk right there. You know what I'm saying?
That's what they did during the strike shortened season. I believe that was
94.
So, there was still a World Series champion then. And so, but getting back to your question and repeat it again so I make sure I answer it.
Yeah, so who do you think is going to have to make more compromises to make a season happen? MLBPA or the MLB?
I think it's going to be shared. But I think the winners, believe it or not, are the owners, because they're going to get major concessions, even if it were for only 1 year, out of the MLBPA just to get them so the players can get onto the field, earn their contracts. Because there's an issue in, lawyer speak or legalese called force majeure. Have you heard of this or talked about it before? So it's one of these things that comes up where something like a pandemic, where you cannot conduct business as usual, and force majeure is invoked, and it basically says everything's voided, all bets are off. And so legally, the owners could invoke that and use that in their step, instead of coming to the table and meeting 50-50, they could say, all right, we're just going to go force majeure. You guys are out of a job, no pay this year, good luck. So I don't see that happening, but knowing that they could pull that card out from their back pocket whenever they wanted to, knowing that they'll probably get some more concessions from the PA for it. So,
but wouldn't you think that would technically be it's kind of putting yourself on a double-edged sword? Yes, you're giving the ultimatum to the players to say that, like, don't try and fight for too much because we could easily just back out. But at the same time, though, these owners, their whole livelihood, like you said, comes off of these television deals, and they're able to get they essentially, you're basically just taking a year off. You're not going to make any sort of money whatsoever. Now, granted, there are owners that have certain business ventures, like John Henry of the Red Sox owns part of like Liverpool football, and then
they own the Boston Globe.
And all right, he's kind of an outlier because he's making billions anyways. But for people who don't know, in New York, the Wilpons, their entire ownership of the Mets comes solely from performance on the field. They have nothing to do with anything in terms of the revenue generated by TV. All that funnels into the investors, because they're only a majority investor of, like, I think it's like 52% as a duo. Then there's other additional investors a part of it. Wouldn't it kind of be against them to try and say we're going to kind of take the year off, all bets off, and if you guys do fight for too much, I feel like it wouldn't be.
I'm not saying they're going to play that card. I'm just saying they have the advantage with that opportunity play. So not to use it, because they would be foregoing all of the TV right revenue, which again, we just talked about. It's the majority of the revenue that they generate. So TV rights are so generous just to broadcast games. So they want that revenue. So they want the players on the field. But I just don't think that, because players are desperate to get on the field to start earning their contracts. They can't make their money until they play and show up for spring training and go, get cleared and all medically cleared and such and make a roster. Because Jack brought up a great point earlier. What happens, when are they going to hold more players on the roster? Because the minor leagues, what are going to happen to the minor leagues this year?
Oh, yeah.
In my opinion, those are the teams and the clubs and the ownership groups that are really going to get steamrolled, and not in a good way. Like, they're going to lose millions of dollars. Because do you think they'll get to open this year? My senses say no. And so that's going to force major league clubs to either keep more players on the roster. And what does that do for salary caps? What does that do for median salary benchmarks that they have to keep? All kinds of other financial implications of that. But I believe they'll grow the player roster, again, because they're playing double headers a lot. So I think they're going to maybe raise the amount of money that they'll have to spend on player salaries this year. But with that said, there's still cap implications for years down the road. So if you keep more players, will they forego some of their rights under years of contract that they have with the teams? I don't know. So that's why I'm so interested in how this is going to play out in 48 hours. Normally this would be months of off-season talk, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Maybe
What's still interesting, though, is that despite if there's a season, or if for whatever reason if MLBPA does not approve within the next 48 hours, if there is a season or if there's no season, players still get a year of service time, which means their contracts for this year are counted as a year of service. So players with 1 year left on their contract, i.e. Mookie Betts, become a free agent at the end of the year. They are then free to go and sign with other teams. So the question here goes and asks, do the Los Angeles Dodgers, I'm going to use the Dodgers as an example here, because they are probably the team rooting the hardest for a season to happen, because they just spent so much to go get a top 5 player in baseball. Does a team like the Dodgers, if a season doesn't happen and a World Series doesn't count, do they go and do they have a strong argument against Major League Baseball? Are they within their rights to sue Major League Baseball for the service time of someone like Mookie Betts?
I would say sure, they can do whatever they want. Are they going to? I would say at the end of the year, it comes down to dollar and cents. Mookie Betts is an awesome player. No doubt.
I love him. I have his jersey in my closet.
All-Star, MVP. But in 3-4 years' time, is he going to be a top 5 player? The Dodgers, again, and this is the mindset fans and players never have. As an ownership group, you're always thinking about what's best for the team. What's best for the team this year, it may not be what's best for the team next year. And so an investment of that level in Mookie Betts, even next year might not be worth it. There could be another player that emerges that's the person they want to identify, because the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Sox, and other major market teams that just have money out the wazoo to just go after whoever they want, oftentimes just act irrationally and will do that. Even if they already have 6 other guys under contract with, ridiculously high salaries and take a huge salary cap hit for it, they'll still go after him anyway. So
yeah,
that's why baseball, in my opinion, is ridiculous, because you really only have a couple of teams that are going to win because they have the resources to go after it.
Yeah, well, but there's different reasons why. In the NBA, we see Golden State and we see whatever team LeBron is on consistently making the push for the finals, because they have the talent on the team. You stack your team. In baseball, you just go and you spend the money. You can't do that in any other sport. So kind of what you're saying, in Major League Baseball, you can go out and you can spend as much money as you want on Mookie Betts, Aaron Judge, Mike Trout, Bryce Harper. Spend as much as you want on anybody you want. The only thing you have to pay is that tax at the end of the year. It's not like the NBA or in the NFL where you have to manage your salaries on a larger scale.
Exactly. And that's why I think, and the MLB is set up where the salary cap penalties are not enough to deter teams from just egregiously violating those things.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So, and that's why it's kind of silly. Like the MLB doesn't really care that the teams are violating it because it just makes them more money. So they pay that luxury tax. And, the Dodgers, it means nothing to them. They literally could light millions of dollars on fire in the same capacity. There's always more money for them to go find to do this. So to me, I wish it operated differently to give it more equity across the league. And quite frankly, I would love to see that, there, like in the English Premier League, there was relegation. So you couldn't just go out there and tank.
Mhm.
But we know that's not going to happen either because, it's a monopoly and that's how everybody's in business to keep themselves in business. So, but, I wanted to sort of dovetail what you said about the NBA, which, Steve, you don't know me yet. The NBA of the major sports is by far my least favorite. And so, I have strong opinions on the NBA, but, relative to the MLB, they're doing even better. They only rely on 22% of ticket sales. So if an NBA season is played with no fans, NBA owners are going to be really happy because they don't have to operate stadiums. Because I heard a report that they might have all teams relocate to Disney's Wild World of Sports if Disney's closed, and just make them play in those arenas, which would be awesome for NBA fans to watch at home, but horrendous for all the stadium companies that manage those, like Cleveland Stadium or even all of those sites. Concessions would be zero. So it would just be, there's going to be, just like we talked about in class, Jack, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers in this scenario. And hopefully you can just mitigate some of your financial risks in the process.
And the biggest loser out of all of them are most likely going to be minor league sports in terms of the MLB, the G League, and basketball. The NFL doesn't have one, obviously, and then the NHL will be the AHL and so on. The AHL actually today fully canceled the rest of their season. They were kind of still up in the air. So that kind of leads into my question is that because these entities are considered, they're technically private companies as a whole collective. So we might not see a situation where, like, when a bank goes bankrupt, they get bailed out by the government. If we do see these minor league teams that will not be able to play, whether it be in basketball, the AHL, or minor league sports, might we see some sort of a bailout because they're not going to be able to pay their players while handling everything because their season won't even happen, and then not to mention they're going to be taking funds away if they do expand rosters in the MLB or in the NBA if it even comes back, in order to make room for these additional players to join these rosters. Might we see some sort of a bailout by the government to try and keep sports and minor league sports primarily kind of contained?
Great question. So you've seen the different kinds of bailouts being rolled out for just individual citizens of the United States. They've gotten their $600 or $1,200 check from the government to stay afloat during the pandemic. You'll see, the businesses got their paycheck protection program and they have other EIDL emergency loans. Here's where, if sports applied for and was granted for, do you know how much pushback there would be from all of government and most citizens? Do you know how mad they'd be?
So, well, the LA Lakers applied for a small business loan of like $4.3 million, and everyone was like, "What the hell's going on?" Because
they were probably granted it, and they were probably granted it. Hopefully, they gave it back because, again, no major sports franchise needs this money. They have access to capital from so many places. They literally could just do whatever they wanted. So don't ever feel bad for those folks. The second thing I'll say is, you talked about, would there be a bailout for, lower level sports? In my opinion, I don't believe so, because, and think about this philosophically for a minute, all right? Do you believe that we are in society rewarding the right industries and the right individuals with these $30 million contracts to play sports versus, first line responders that are getting paid, even physicians, nurses, techs, ambulance, EMTs? Do you think that we're in line with what's appropriate for those people? Do we have our values in the right place? In my opinion, absolutely not. So I get mad when I see Garrett Cole ink that $30 million a year salary to pitch every 5 days. Because, looking around, there are people that are basically putting their lives at risk every day, basically barely earning a living, but because it's what they're trained to do, they'll keep doing it, versus these guys that are, running out on the baseball field, making millions, just to play a fun game to keep everybody entertained. Maybe we need to reevaluate. And I think that's what this time of the pandemic is hopefully doing. It's giving people a chance to sort of review how we compensate certain individuals.
So let's talk real quick about then what needs to happen on the team, league, individual part for sports to get back into. I know you just kind of talked about why are we paying athletes millions of dollars, and here we are. We're going to go and talk about it. And by the way, we want to offer our sincere thanks to your wife, who we know is a frontline worker in the hospital. So thank you so much to her, and shout out to all the other essential workers that are putting up with these tough times. So have you guys had a parade in your neighborhood for her?
For her, no. She would find that weird, because she's awesome because her attitude has not changed. She goes into work like she always does, without even a thought of, knowing fully well. But keep in mind that they're professionals. They have the proper equipment. They are protected. They are careful, and they're treating every patient appropriately, the same way they would. Just being cautious if the person presents with either a fever or something that might indicate that they have symptoms.
Sure.
But they have to treat everyone like, even if they're asymptomatic. So, but no parades, not for.
Yeah.
There've been parades in the neighborhood for kids' birthdays parties, but that's been about.
We've had a couple of those too. But anyway, back to the question at hand here.
Yeah,
the major sports that need to that want to get back into playing, NBA and NHL would be in the playoffs right now. They'd be in the later stages of their playoffs right now. Major League Baseball should be a quarter of the way through their season. And then the NFL is the next big question mark. So what does the MLB and the NFL need to do to get their seasons off? Moving games to Arizona and Florida has been talked about, but in terms of like on the team and the league's part, what specifically needs to happen for things to get underway?
So great question, Jack. I think we need to take a step back and just look at what is most likely to happen for each of these sports. So there's the good sports that have a true chance of having a relatively uninterrupted season play out. And these are, the good ones are mostly outdoor sports. So baseball's got a real shot to do, and because it's almost naturally socially distanced in terms of the way it's played, the likelihood of transmission of the virus between players is really low, except on bang bang plays at second base where somebody's stealing and you need to lay the tag down, or at the plate where the catcher's applying the tag for whatever reason. So the MLB may come up with some really interesting rules to avoid those kinds of opportunities to transmit or to pass by the virus on from player to player, even though at the games they tested negative for any symptoms, right? Because you can still be a carrier of this virus without even knowing. So I put baseball in the good category. I put golf in that category too. So Steve, I was glad to see that you played recently. Keep playing golf. Just keep your distance from the next player. Mm-hmm. And other sports are good. I still list football as being in the bad category. And if you guys look on ESPN today, Dr. Fauci just posted something about football because he talks about the problem with this virus being transmitted from people. It resides in your nasal passages. And so what happens when you're profusely sweating, like most football players do on the field, if you wipe your nose on your sleeve or on your hand or anywhere, and then you make a tackle and put it on somebody else's jersey, put it on their helmet, put it somewhere else, and then they touch it and somehow touch their face and that's the way it gets transmitted. So that's my big issue with football altogether. We could be facing a season without football because you can't go to even two-hand tipped football, which the NFL is kind of playing these days, which I don't agree with. But tackling forcibly puts that transmission piece into play. And so if you have any risk of transmitting the virus between players with a tackle, and you're saying, we can't have this happen, well, we may not be able to have football. So but again, don't feel bad for the teams, the NFL teams. The ones who are really going to get hurt by this is the NCAA.
Oh, yeah.
And the NCAA is being the most diligent in following what the CDC and Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and other leading epidemiologists are saying, and that is, you have to minimize the risk to zero. And zero means, unfortunately, no contact, i.e., and so even though football and even sports like soccer, which is also outside, but the chances that you go for a header and hit a guy inside the 18-yard box trying to, go up for the same ball, you can have that possibility to transmit the virus.
Right.
Go ahead.
So speaking of transmitting, and this is something that I found really odd, was a few days ago the UFC had their biggest card ever, and I don't know what was kind of going on in Dana White's head trying to plan this whole thing out, but I watched the whole thing from beginning to end, and there's a lot of different controversy about it. But relating to what Dr. Fauci talked about with his report on football, the UFC had some of the most bloodshed that I've ever seen on a card. They're obviously sweating profusely. It's direct contact. You're in choke holds. You're in leg holds. You're in every sort of hold. You're basically you're more or less having consensual sex while playing this game, while fighting somebody, and basically fighting your life. What's the implications here? Because I know there was one fight, I believe it was a Uriah Hall. His opponent was deemed out due to COVID. He tested positive. They had tested everybody prior to fighting a few days prior, and those who came up negative, still though they could have been asymptomatic. I don't know how deep their tests were. Hopefully they were very deep. But with that being in mind, do you think if this UFC fight we find out in 2 weeks was fully successful, everyone was healthy, do you think we might see these teams kind of easing back into things where there will be contact? Because I feel like the UFC is almost as contact as you can get.
The only reason that I think UFC and boxing I would throw in that same category, I actually have them listed as good in the good category, because you have it's only one fighter, right? And maybe a couple of, the cut man, his trainer, and a couple other people. So just the fact that you have so few people involved, you could easily self-quarantine all those folks for 2 weeks before the fight, and have them train in a facility separated from everyone else and just basically wall them off from society, and they would be fine, right? And so if you do that for both opponents who are fighting each other in the ring, then theoretically your transmission has now fallen to zero. The problem, think about organizations like football organizations that carry 47 players on a roster,
53.
probably the same number. Yeah, 52. They probably, or 53. This about the same number of coaches. You just exponentially increase the opportunity to transmit. And how are you going to isolate all those people, all their families, all their associated, admin people? It just becomes a lot harder. So that's why I think football is really in a tough place at this moment. Think about all the college programs that have, hundreds of student athletes involved with the football programs. To me, that's why it's going to be really rough on them. And, even though it's outside, which technically they say being outside kills the virus naturally, but there's still a chance you could transmit it directly from somebody when you're tackling. So
that's a really good point. The fact that you could quarantine 2 UFC fighters for the recommended amount of time and then have them fight, their transmission would be, essentially zero. That's something that we didn't really think about. If the NFL really wanted to get a season off, could they quarantine everybody for 2 weeks? They could, but in terms of enforcing that is a lot harder to enforce it on 100 people per organization. Multiply that by 32 organizations. You're talking about, more math than I can do in my head, and that's simple math. You're talking about thousands of people that you have to keep an eye on. That's very, very hard to do. So you mentioned the NCAA kind of being that's going to be the most affected by this. Quinnipiac is a mid-major school. They don't have a football program, and their marquee sport is hockey, which doesn't require as much staff. Do you see a hockey season happening? It's an indoor sport. It's in the cold, which is good for the virus. Do you see a Quinnipiac hockey season happening?
So it remains to be seen what the NCAA's rulings will be for fall. If the NCAA comes out and says, yeah, we can play sports in the fall, I would give it a really good shot to happen. So if NCAA opens up in the fall, I'd say the whole year of sports runs. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, the NCAA gave up $1 billion of revenue because they missed out. If the virus had waited 2 more weeks to arrive in the U.S., we would have had a March Madness, which would have earned the NCAA $1 billion. 1 billion with a B.
In TV mostly?
Yeah, that's what all the networks pay, essentially, the NCAA. That's 70% of their revenue right there, because NCAA football is largely individual TV contracts that the universities negotiate. Like University of Texas, they have their own network, the Longhorn Network, that they generate their money, and then they pay the NCAA a fee just to belong and be part of the clearinghouse and to be part of the bowl structure. But so the NCAA is really tied into basketball and also football for their revenue. So if those two sports are unable to happen, you'll see a lot of problems, not only with the NCAA, but also with universities and their athletic programs. You might see a couple of them disappear. And I'm not talking about the Power 5 conferences, but some of the mid-major ones. Like the American Athletic Conference is kind of done. But, some of those smaller market teams could drop major programs. I don't think anybody will ever drop basketball per se, but because it's so inexpensive to manage, but football programs might disappear. Now, when you asked about a Quinnipiac hockey season, I did list hockey in the bad category, like a really low chance. And I'm going to put the NHL and the AHL, ECHL, and other minor leagues in there too. Think about how the sport itself works. You've got all of these players digging the corners trying to get the puck out, body checking each other at mid-ice. Same concept with football. The possibility for transmission is there. So I'm thinking, could people go back to, I don't know if the NHL would ever encourage people to wear masks again, but putting those eye tech shields back on and covering up all the holes, it's like having a face shield on. Like you're preventing the transmission possibility right there, potentially, or at least reducing it greatly. So could we get to a point where, the required equipment is stuff that protects a player from exchanging, the virus with another player, and that would be signaled as okay? We could probably get pretty close. So, I'm hopeful that I don't know what I would do if they took hockey away for an entire season. That's my favorite sport, besides football and hockey are my favorite. I grew up playing and wasn't nearly good enough to play in college, but die hard, as you guys can see, but your listeners can't hear. I'm a huge Philadelphia fan, all the way around. Eagles, Flyers, Phillies. I'll take the Sixers, but I don't really like NBA.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I know. And but college hockey, in my opinion, is the best of the college sports because you're essentially getting NHL caliber players to play, who, because it's now becoming as much of a feeder into the NHL as is the minor leagues, in my opinion. So I think, Quinnipiac's team, and keep in mind, this past year, I've had 6 players of the men's team in my classes, and they're all really diligent, good students, and fantastic hockey players. So I want them to play because, I'm right there with them. I want, and because if they play, that means we might have a chance to have a intramural hockey season, which I participate in that league as well, which I always look forward to. But the main thing is hockey, the NHL especially. I was talking about percentage of ticket sales for revenue. They're up in the 45% range that they depend on ticket sales to power. So they could be at one of the leagues most at risk for losing more money than most. And if you throw in concessions and merchandising into that realm, they're up in the 75% realm because their TV broadcasting right contracts are much lower than the other 3 major sports. So hockey is really interested in making sure there's a season that goes in 2020.
So the one category that we haven't really talked about at all, and I don't know, Jack, if you had any other follow-up questions or I can move on here. I am curious to see, we've talked about the big 4 sports. We talked about college. We understand the brevity of college football not happening, what the Power 5 conferences are going to be losing, considering they'll reel in $200, $400 million, even almost close to the billions in terms of Texas, and how now, like for me, I'm a Notre Dame fan, so they would lose out on exponential money from NBC, the SEC networks, the Big Ten networks. But I want to focus in on these networks as a whole. So Fox has a major chokehold in college sports. ESPN has a chokehold in college sports for the SEC. The Big Ten, NBC obviously is close with the NHL. They purchased Versus. That was the original contributor. And then the MLB has their own small pocket affiliates all around, but mostly in terms of ESPN, Fox, the bigger networks that we know and love. If these sports do not happen, and we see what they've tried to do to kind of combat the fact that sports might not happen. So ESPN has done The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. They're doing a new series with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire on the steroid era. So their whole thing is film. Fox Sports, NBC, and CBS haven't really had that luxury on the sports side. And just for the listeners to know, the sports end of CBS, Fox, and NBC are not related to the overall NBC Universal networks. So where Fox, NBC, and CBS will have their daytime television shows and their primetime shows. The sports side is a whole new realm where there isn't like revenue sharing, but there would be, where if one is kind of falling off, the other will kind of contribute. It's two different entities. So if sports do not happen, how much money are we looking at in terms of financial losses for these groups that have these multi-billion-dollar agreements with these sports franchises in order to put on their games?
I would say in the hundreds of billions if it's all sports, right? So a lot of money gets traded hands every season for rights and because the reason that these obviously networks are ponying up these incredible contracts is because they can go out and sell advertising during commercial breaks and other ways, for sponsorships and such for these. So what's going to happen if we don't have sports? Well, you're going to see major changes like we've seen for the rest of the economy. So you've seen, certain industries get decimated, talking about the retail industry. So we would bring the entertainment and television industry in line with those, i.e. there would be a lot of cost-cutting measures put into place by, ESPN, Disney, which is their parent company. Same thing with NBC Sports, same thing with CBS Sports, Fox Sports. You would see a lot of these, large contract employees either getting let go, furloughed, or at least taking salary reductions, contract reductions, and major cost-cutting pieces put into place. And they would then shift, in my opinion, like ESPN has, to a lot of documentary content or things that can be created rather than streamed live. So there is some value in rebroadcasting some games, high marquee games, but that wanes after a while. So you need to continuously come up with new ideas to put newly produced content out there for people who want to see. So we were joking with my family the other day, on ESPN, the Ocho, they've got stuff like, what were they saying? Axe throwing is now on television.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of their primetime time slots on one of their, top 5 channels. When would you have ever heard axe throwing competing with time slots that college basketball was on?
Right.
These are the kinds of, and could you put axe throwing in the good category for sports? I guess. I guess you could put bowling in there too. Stuff that I would never watch, but if it's the only thing going, that's what they're going to run. So I think you'll see, and I know I talked about good and bad categories just to round that out. I've already mentioned golf being in the good category. I think that would be the one sport that would be least hindered by the pandemic, and much less so than baseball per se, because, so the Masters locks everybody out of Augusta and only lets the players play. Well, you would still have, the majority of people tune in to watch Tiger pump his fist on the 18th hole, beating out Rory with a 60-foot putt. And now there might not be a huge roar from the gallery, but everybody at home would be jumping up and down to watch.
Right.
I know I would. So all I'm arguing is that, if you're a largely outdoor sport that doesn't have a lot of person-to-person contact like golf does or baseball does, you got to be feeling pretty good about your chances. But if you're an indoor sport like hockey, basketball even, like, think about the amount of times that people get boxed out,
Fouled.
or fouled, or just, or when LeBron James takes his 8 steps in the lane to go up for a dunk and he's got nobody touches him, but he'll say that, somebody sneezed on him on the way and he'll get his and one opportunity. That's why I don't watch the NBA, because I don't like listening to them whine and cry like babies all the time. So, but even basketball is going to have its issues making the case that they can do this safely. So until there's a vaccine, and that's the kicker.
So, my last question here before we move on to our final segment of the day. It is horse racing season in America. The Kentucky Derby was pushed back to September, and then the races that would follow that are the Preakness and then the Belmont Stakes. Are we going to see all three happen in the fall?
Sure, why not? Because so it's outdoor. I mean, are you going to bar Bob Baffert from, sitting there like cheering on his horse and his jockey to come in again and make him millions and millions of dollars? Probably not, because, can you clear all the stands of all the people wearing their giant hats and drinking their mint juleps? Sure, they can all do that from home and watch the Derby from home. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about going to a Derby, but I'm told that the infield is out of this world.
Oh yeah,
just the experience.
Have you been?
I've been to Belmont.
No, I've not been, but best man at my wedding has been, and another couple of close friends have.
Wow.
Videos out are just crazy. My point is that you can run a horse race very easily, and
sure,
relative to, because it's a one-time thing. It's 2 minutes around the track. Yes, animals can pass it to each other apparently as well, but I think the owners have put so much money into having these these horses run, these jockeys train with these animals, and if they get the go ahead to do it, because I think you'll find that America is really willing to support something like this because they just want to bet and they're looking for something to bet on. So.
All right.
So, hold on. I have one final question before we cut. So going back to, we were saying how it's almost ridiculous how Garrett Cole's making $1,700 a pitch because he's making $35 million a year. I know that's an actual stat. He's making roughly $1,700 a pitch.
That's crazy.
I think it's about $2,000 a strike. It's kind of weird, but because we're going to have such a drop off in revenues if sports aren't played and games don't happen, and this is mostly in reference to baseball because every other league has their salary caps. Might we be seeing situations where, because players aren't A, trying to earn their contracts, and B, these players aren't making these gargantuan contracts, players that are going to be available come free agency, might we see a drop off in how much they're really going to make? Because A, we haven't seen what they've done. We're basing all of their future performance now off of a year of no sports where they just trained. And are these teams going to be able to afford these $35 million deals? Do you think we're going to kind of dial back to where we kind of should be, where the highest pay contract would be around like $15, $14 million? Or are we going to kind of see a shift backwards, you think?
Realistically, no, I don't see that happening, because I can't see a players' association accepting that kind of, again, that would be sort of a league-wide give back, or I just don't see, that would be a huge ratcheting down of, or a step back in, finance for a large body of players. So, because that would hurt the median salary as well. So you would have to bring everything back in line with what the top players are earning. So the middle tier earners, or the median salary earners, like when those giant contracts get signed, because then their median salary also increases a little bit. Mm-hmm. Do I like it? No, I think it's horrible. And I would love to see player salaries get squashed. But that just means more money for the ownership, not any less money for them. So I just hate seeing players get paid $35 million a year.
Absolutely.
To trot it out there every 5 days, to throw maybe 75 pitches and, maybe or maybe not contribute. And if he has a bad day, you got to wait another 5 days to see if he'll have a better day. Like, that's exactly crazy.
Yeah.
Or how players like Miguel Cabrera are making, I think it was like 13 times the median salary of the average household family in Detroit, like something absolutely crazy. He would make $5,000 for a strikeout, and the average worker at Walmart would have to work a month to make that, which is insane.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. All right. So let's switch gears to our final segment here before we gotta go. We gotta finish up if I want to release this episode on time today. So we brought in the business guy to talk about sports business. We just talked about how sports can get back underway in America, but who's gonna make that happen? We need to go over the top 5 businessmen in America or businesswomen. I don't want to, no disrespect to anybody
Biases.
out there. Yeah, no bias, exactly. So, Steve, do you have a 5, Steve?
Generally, I mean, I'm not. The biggest thing with this was that I kind of focused it in on sports and how would sports be able to do it. But if we're talking general, I can certainly make one on the fly.
So no, I have mine are the top 5 sports business people in America. I have 5. If you have 5, that's fine. And then I think you and I should go, and then we'll have Professor Sanders do his trip. We'll do his. We'll have him do his, and we'll kind of explain why we have who we have on our list. Sound good?
It's great.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm ready to go. I got my 5 right here on my phone. We'll come up with a graphic. It'll be up on Twitter later this evening. So in no particular order, these are just my top 5 businessmen in America. Robert Kraft, owner of the New England Patriots, already got a thumbs down from Tripp. And that's because the Eagles beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, which means that no. So, all right. I don't even know who even is the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Jeffrey Lurie.
Jeffrey Lurie. See,
I knew that.
But
Come on.
Robert Kraft, it just donated over $1 million of supplies to frontline workers. He had a whole plane full of the Patriots team plane. He loaded it up and sent it to with over $1 million worth of supplies. Good for him. He also just decided to auction off his Super Bowl 51 ring for charity as well. So I have him on my list. The Steinbrenner family. I wanted to put George on here, but he's passed away, and so has his son Hal. They owned the New York Yankees. They bought them in the 70s. Totally tinkered with the team too many times, and then drafted a guy named Derek Jeter. Won 4 out of 5 championships. And how many? I don't even know how many times have the Yankees won under the Steinbrenners. At least 5.
Yes, since the 70s, it's been a while.
At least 5. So I have the Steinbrenner family, George Steinbrenner, Hal Steinbrenner, and his offspring on here. Number 3, I have Billy Beane, general manager of the Oakland Athletics, now the president of baseball operations for the Oakland A's. He took small amounts of money and built a 102-win team in the middle of the steroid era in 2002. That movie is absolutely great. So Billy Beane's on that list. And then I have 2 players. One of them is Tom Brady for his TB12 brand. I tried his TB12 diet and got really fast at track. I think Steve has somehow. Steve is.
So what you're saying is you're in favor of the Tampa Bay Gronkaneers?
I'm in favor. Oh, Steve got his computer going.
Yeah, no, my phone died, so I had to bounce out.
All right. So I have Tom Brady as one of my players, and then my other player is LeBron James.
Okay.
LeBron opened up the I Promise School, also has his own brand, does a lot of great for Akron, Ohio.
My top 5 businessmen and women in sports. Unfortunately, when I was going through this, I realized that there really aren't a lot of business women in all the sports. They're very few and far between to come by. So unfortunately, my list is fully made up of men, but I'll try and be as pro as I can. Number 1, I am going to put the Steinbrenners. They created they created the evil empire. Look, I'm a Mets fan, and I'm going to say this.
I'm a Red Sox fan, and I said it.
This team, if you look at their progression from when they were purchased in the 70s and how the Yankees, and this is where I kind of critique them, is that their GM Brian Cashman, I think, is one of the worst GMs in baseball. Reason being is that the man spent $300 million in absolute busts. AJ Burnett, Chase Headley, Jacoby Ellsbury. We already know his issue. The Yankees are able to burn money and still have enough to use as toilet paper. Like they have so much running, and yes, they've been the most successful franchise since their founding with their teams in the 20s and the 30s. But this team grew even more exponentially from the 70s on. My number two is going to be LeBron James. As a brand itself, there's a player and then there's a brand. And LeBron James has managed to be a lifetime earner of Nike with like $1 billion shoe contract. The only person who's even made more was Michael Jordan, and that was only because he created his own brand off of it. And the man's still making shoes. My sister's trying to FaceTime me. Stop that. So LeBron James has managed to open a school. He's been an actor. He does stand-up comedy now. The man.
Actor.
All right. I don't care what you're gonna call him as an actor. Michael Jordan played baseball and batted 200. Believe me, you could be an actor and be just bottom line decent. You're still doing great things. He's also creating now a brand for not only himself but his family. All his sons are athletes. His wife is starting her own brand and her own line in her own right. I'm putting LeBron James number two. Number three is Mark Cuban. Now, Mark Cuban, I've seen him on Fox News. He's been on CNN. He's done all these different things in politics. He's even considered a presidential run. I think Mark Cuban he's one of the most polarizing figures in sports because of the fact that he's managed to build not only his tech growth, but then also now convert it into sports where he knows the sports industry, he knows Wall Street. He knows business in general. He's one of the stars of Shark Tank. He's managed to diversify his money in so many different ways that, yes, he isn't necessarily a sports guy, but he's managed to keep everything all in all based around his likings and his interests, and he's managed to do exponentially incredible things. The fourth person is like Mark Cuban, and this is a very cold take to some, but it's Donald Trump. And I'm going to say this outright. I don't support Donald Trump as a political candidate. That isn't my leaning. But in business, I have to give him the world of credit. The way he's managed to keep his money spread out, whether it be there have been a lot of failed ventures. I will admit that. Trump University being one of the most funny ones.
Trump Steaks.
Yeah, well, yes, those as well. But he's managed to create a business empire and a brand. Again, much like LeBron James, television. He owns golf courses. He has investments abroad, investments on the home front. He has so many different ventures that, yes, some have failed, but the one thing that I've learned is that you need to fail in order to succeed. And yes, his failures have been major flops, whether it be in gambling in Atlantic City or his university venture, or even in some real estate ventures. But his most successful have been in his sports. His golf courses out in Shinnecock, Long Island, and then as well one, I believe, in Scotland, where his grandfather was from, has managed to make a lot of money and has managed to build the brand of golf even further. Both those courses are actually rated in the top 50 of best courses to play on. And as well, Donald Trump's looking into possibly purchasing a sports franchise if that ends up coming to it post-presidency. If that happens and they're able to maintain, I think his wealth and growth could expand even further. But again, he's kind of an outlier here. My fifth is it's going to be John Henry, the owner of the Boston Red Sox, Liverpool FC, and the Boston Globe. The man made $1 billion. Is one of the youngest owner. Was one of the. What do you mean? A thumbs down from you?
From me,
John Henry. Hold on. John Henry is one of the youngest professionals to make $1 billion solely in sports. The man bought the Red Sox. I don't know when exactly.
2000, I believe.
So 2000. All right. He started in the Boston Globe. He managed to create a journalistic empire with the Boston Globe. He almost purchased the New York Times and the LA Times at the same time and tried to create basically a monopoly in journalism until the government said, no, you can't do that. He then turned to the Red Sox and now recently found himself in love with soccer and turned to a lowly Liverpool Football Club who at the time had Luis Suarez, then got rid of him. And that was almost bottom of the barrel, almost ready to get relegated in the EPL, and managed to win Champions League wins, even a championship for that matter. His work. Most owners, you look at them and they aren't necessarily within the day-to-day runnings of the team, like the operations of it. He's managed to kind of stay a president owner, kind of like a Jerry Jones, but not like Jerry Jones, considering he's in his own planet. But John Henry's been able to foothold himself in the operations, but also be successful. We don't see a lot of businessmen able to do that. Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, at times, obviously with Tom Brady has worked. His priors, oh, sorry, Thunder, as well as others. They haven't necessarily, Magic Johnson being one as well within the Lakers. You see him with the Dodgers, it's worked, but he hasn't been a foothold in it. So I believe John Henry is also one of the most successful in the business world. I'm sorry to rant. That's my 5. Trip, I want to hand it up to you.
Wait. Before I want to rebuttal on 2 of them.
Okay.
The last 2 that you had.
Right.
Yes, Trump has made a lot of money. No doubt about that. The only thing is that he inherited a lot of his money. And I know that a lot of these guys inherited their money, but Trump inherited. Yes. I like what you said about Mark Cuban. I totally forgot about him. But in terms of like Donald Trump, he was denied buying an NFL franchise in the early 2000s, which led to the original version of the XFL, which ended up failing.
Yeah.
And so Trump ended up bankrupt in that aspect. The other thing is that Trump is universally I wouldn't say universally hated, but he is very much disliked in the sports world. I think he's most popular amongst the NFL. Mm-hmm. But if you look at like the NBA, and if he went and he bought a franchise in the NBA, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of players were like, I am not playing if this guy is writing my checks because I don't believe in what he did during his presidency.
I agree, but we're talking about the most successful business.
Yes. Yes, but other than that, you're absolutely right. He has made money in the golf industry, and for that reason, he could deserve a spot on this list.
I'm not going to defend really quick. I'm not going to defend Donald Trump for his stake in the NFL because yes, the XFL was a total failure. But the first time around, the XFL failed mostly because it was way too extreme for it to even last. And players, first of all, people forget this. The XFL had more injuries in the first 3 weeks than the NFL had in a whole season.
Yeah. And then finally with John Henry, my rebuttal against him is that he has teared his franchise down one too many times for me to put him on that list. And most recently, like, of course, I've got recency bias. He just traded away Mookie Betts because for his own pocket, he didn't want to pay the luxury tax, which is like a 0.01% of his net worth. 0.01%. He sold his home in Connecticut for the same amount of money as he owed in luxury taxes, and he chose not to pay Mookie Betts. Sorry, man. Not with John Henry right now. And then he tried to go and he paid social media influencers to go on Twitter and Instagram and be like, this was a good decision by the Red Sox. He paid social media influencers to convince the fans that he made a good decision. Sorry.
This is some lowercase j journalism, Jack. I'm kind of upset with you.
I gotta say, you guys are cracking me up over here because your age is showing here, and remember, you have to sort of remove yourself from the emotional attachment to some of this stuff because these are business decisions that are being made.
It's hard for me to do. I got Fenway Park on my back wall.
And that's where when I was a young man like you guys, now I'm just an old man. And even my kids call me old. But I'm wiser now. And here's where, some of these ideas I'm not going to criticize you guys on your top 5 because I'm hoping I get invited back to join you again.
Absolutely.
So
you are more than welcome to criticize our top 5.
Yeah, please do.
You've already thumbs down like 2 of mine and 1 of his. So
maybe I have the top 5, what you were looking for in a top 5 wrong. I thought you were going for, sort of who has the most influence or in the industries of their sports.
Oh, so no, that's totally, that's fair game.
I interpreted it as people who have the most influence within sports altogether.
Okay, all right.
So,
well, you're the professional here. So if you think that's what that is, then you're absolutely right. We are probably the ones that are wrong.
In that case, the list also fully changes in it.
Yeah,
that way.
Yeah, you add Megan Rapinoe in there.
Because you guys looked at a lot of team owners, which in my opinion, in terms of their influence in overall sports and in general, is very small. Mm-hmm. So and you guys pegged it a couple of times. The world of sports is moving towards individualism. So where you can have a person generate a brand on themselves.
Absolutely.
And so LeBron is one of the biggest brands, larger than many of the conglomerate corporations in the world, right? So one thing that I looked at is those people as brands moving forward. But I'm going to leapfrog LeBron and just say Phil Knight, the former president of Nike. He's now sort of semi-retired, but very, very active in the company still. He has had a huge influence in making those brands possible.
Absolutely.
Because shoe contracts and other apparel contracts are the most lucrative piece of most individual brands like revenue that they generate. So LeBron makes $20 million a year playing basketball. He makes $500 million on apparel sales, or more. Right. So thank you, Phil Knight.
So is Phil Knight on your list?
Yeah. So he's in my top 5.
Okay. All right.
So I was leading into my top 5 with that. So I'll start with him. The second person I'm going to go to is Tiger Woods, because you have to take all of sports into consideration. So golf was viewed as a white guy sport up until Tiger Woods burst upon the scene and just completely hijacked it in a positive way. He's like the Happy Gilmore of real golf. Mm-hmm. And so brought so many other viewers into the sport and re-energized a really tired base of fans, but also became the most well-paid, well-compensated just for appearing in tournaments. I mean, and the Tiger Woods brand, TW, is almost as big a brand as Jordan's. So it rivals, and even with his personal issues, notwithstanding, he survived, and his health issues with his back, his brand has continued. So apparently, if you're good enough at what you do, your brand can survive just about anything.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why because I love watching Tiger Woods. I also love watching Rory and a bunch of other golfers, especially when they're on a roll. That is the most electrifying part of golf for me, when people get on a 6-hole swing where they're 6 under par and closing in on the leaders, and you can't not watch.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll say that. My number 3, I'm going to jump over to Olympics for a minute. And I put a couple people in this boat. I'm going to throw Lindsey Vonn and Michael Phelps in there and say, for what they've done, they really capitalized on their individual brand power to make themselves basically wealthier than they ever dreamed of, and just riding that out. So Lindsey Vonn only won 1 gold medal, won a couple of other silvers and bronzes, but starting in 2008, became the darling of the Olympics and rode that all the way there. Good for her. She's a great businesswoman for it. And now she doesn't have to work another day if she didn't want to.
Exactly.
Most other Olympic athletes. And Michael Phelps for the same reason. And he still survived his personal issues too. So again, you can still make plenty of money being good at something and then just capitalizing on that with your brand. My fourth one, because I've got about 100 honorable mentions too, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet. I'm going to go with Sepp Blatter, who's president of FIFA.
Okay.
Do you guys even know who that is?
I've never heard of him.
So the world's most richest sport is soccer, and he controls all of it.
Was he post corruption or
no? He survived several rounds of ouster.
Okay.
Because he literally just keeps paying off everybody to keep him in power. Like that's how ridiculous soccer is around the world. So yeah, he was part of, the Qatar getting the next World Cup. He's also part of, the Euro Cup being completely, pushed out for pandemic. Yeah. It's all this other stuff, but he controls so much of it that he had to be in my top 5. And like I said, because soccer is the richest sport. I'm going to go next with, and I don't really think he's up here in the top 5, but just want to give him a shout out, even though he's the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones, self-made. He does exactly what all of his fans want. And that
Except
is,
for pay Dak.
well, yeah. I'm not sure all his fans want Dak paid. Hello.
That's
But
overrated.
I will say, anybody who can execute a flawless draft from his $250 million mega yacht and look good doing it is like star power in my book. So he's up there. I think he's a complete jerk because, as an Eagles fan, I hate everything about the Cowboys, but I do have to compliment him on his $250 million yacht. And then, last, you can take this any number of ways. I'm going to put MJ, LeBron. I'm going to throw David Beckham in the same pot. And I'll also put out the Williams sisters for tennis.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
They have really, again, a fringe sport, in my opinion. They brought it into mainstream together because they dominated it. And they became the brand that anybody tuned in to watch.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time where Anna Kournikova was like eating into their popularity just because she was so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But she couldn't hold a candle to their talent. And I will say those two women by far will have, I don't think you're going to find another tennis, certainly a female tennis athlete that's going to come close to what they were able to accomplish. So I'll finish with that.
Awesome. That's a great list. I had some honorable mentions too. I put MJ in there. I had Alex Rodriguez as well. I think the Alex Rodriguez rebrand is something that goes, I know I was very down on Alex Rodriguez too because of the whole steroid thing, but his rebrand that he had, you're not a fan of it, but he took himself, he was the villain of Major League Baseball. Yankee fans hated him. And he turned himself into one of the most likable personalities on the in the ESPN broadcasts. He's knowledgeable about the sport. He's funny. He's entertaining. He's good on camera. His rebrand has been very, very well done. One of the best. And we really are just starting to notice that in this past season. My only question for you, Tripp, is you brought up the Williams sisters and you brought up Michael Phelps and you brought up Lindsey Vonn. In terms of for your athletes, because the only one that you talked about in terms of like a brand was Tiger and LeBron. But for those other athletes that you talked about, you kind of just said that they got there because they were talented. But what have they done outside of just being good to help their sport grow?
Well, I think so. You're right. Did Lindsey Vonn help skiing grow? It certainly brought more viewers and sponsors to it. Mm-hmm. Did Michael Phelps help swimming grow? I believe he did individually. Did they do more than outside of their sport? Those two? Probably not. The Williams sisters, I didn't research them outside of what they did for women's tennis, but I do know that, again, I looked at sports, individual sports, to see who has had the greatest impact on the trajectory of the individual sport over the last 25 years. So sure. That's where those athletes came in. They're certainly not the wealthiest or have amassed the most wealth out of, mm-hmm. all the people that I could have gone with honorable mentions too. But, in terms of making themselves wealthy off of their own name and their on field, on court success, it is sort of, they were sort of the blueprint. Like Serena Williams was the blueprint.
Yeah.
MJ was the blueprint, and everybody sort of saw that and we're like, oh, we could do that too. That's how we're gonna, change this sport. And you'll see most athletes try to go that same route now, where they establish themselves, their name, versus maybe the team or the organization that they are with.
Yeah.
And also,
it's more beneficial financially to them to do that.
not to mention too, I feel like with especially in the Olympics with skiing and swimming being somewhat niche sports, same thing almost with tennis to a degree, where LeBron James playing basketball can create a brand because you see his Nikes, you see the Nikes on his feet, you see the lion that's trademarked, you see the I Promise bracelets that like he has. I think he has like 7 or 8 trademarks. Then you look at Michael Phelps, where I remember seeing an article that granted I was only 11 years old, I believe, during Beijing, but I remember I saw an article by Forbes a long time ago, and it said that it was the television ratings of every Olympic event, and it's like 10 million, 10 million, like 8, almost to the billions the second you see USA Swimming come on, and it's a Phelps 100-meter butterfly or his relay or something, because he was just that polarizing. And David Beckham is another one of those where his move to the LA Galaxy, I believe the revenue in MLS ticket prices would jump 200% because the LA Galaxy was coming to Jersey to play the Red Bulls, where a ticket was $15. It's now $100 because you're watching David Beckham. It's like when LeBron James goes anywhere, ticket prices are going to zoom because everyone wants to watch. Everyone wants their one game to see LeBron. Like Knicks tickets, I think on average now are like $70, $80. But when LeBron comes, it's $230 just to get your foot in the door. We aren't even sitting down yet. So it's these brands and these exposure things, and relating it back to the fact that these sports kind of are niche, where Michael Phelps really can't make much more money with sponsorships outside of like what Gatorade maybe, because you can't like work with Speedo. There's no Olympic like brand that you could really like market to yourself, or maybe like a designer pair of goggles. I don't even know. But
he tanked
basketball, baseball, sports.
You know that he tanked his personal value when he got busted for smoking weed.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, but again, it's the personal issue where even though Michael Phelps did get busted in that way, it's almost like I equate Michael Phelps to Pete Rose almost, because where Pete Rose got his drop off with gambling, he's still retaining. He's still well known. He's still one of the most well known players of all time. He's doing commercials now. I think Phelps was in a commercial a few years ago for the Olympics, anyways, to kind of promote it for Rio. Pete Rose was in a commercial for Skechers, and the joke was his wife said, "Oh, you can't be in the hall," and he was like, "Oh, even this one." Like it's yes, you're tarnished, but you still maintain a kind of surviving to get past it, and you can still keep it up.
Tarnished, disgraced. Jack, I don't know what's worse. The fact that Mac is sitting down there talking about Pete Rose being not so bad, or your reaction is non-existent. Like
no.
We've had these talks about Pete Rose before.
Game of baseball several times, and he's
the problem.
Back in.
All right, but hold on, wait. So you're telling me Michael Phelps does weed, all of a sudden he's disgraced by the swimming community. Pete Rose gambles.
No, I'm saying if Michael Phelps had been 5 years later, this wouldn't be an issue.
Okay. But you're saying Pete Rose for gambling, not even on himself.
Pete Rose was throwing games that he was managing.
No, he wasn't.
Managing or even playing in as a player coach.
Yeah.
For personal gain.
Pete Rose, he said
the lowest, and I'm a purist in this respect. He is the lowest human being on the planet. I love Charlie Hustle. He was a key cog in getting the Philadelphia Phillies their 1980 and 1981 World Series. I love the guy for that, but for his gambling and his cheating and point shaving as an active player and manager, I will never forgive him. Therefore, in my opinion, he should never make it into the Hall of Fame, no matter how many people try to. And I know we don't have time for this, but man, you just really got me going.
I mean, like, I wish we could.
Wait. Hold on, I have my one small rebuttal here. So, again, we don't know the facts because we aren't Pete Rose, but he said in an interview, again, could have been lying, I don't know, but the horse's mouth says it. I'm more apt to believe it. He said he did gamble, not as a player, but on the team. But he gambled only that they would win, never that they would lose. So he wasn't throwing games. He was still trying to win games, but he was trying to gain on a different end.
you know he's only admitting to what he got busted for. Come on. It's only
No, I'm not saying
it's like A-Rod saying, "Oh, I didn't know what I was taking for like 5 months." A-Rod's been juicing his entire life. And just because he got married to J-Lo, all of a sudden he becomes his public persona has been massaged where it's okay. Again, it's one of those things where I can't even believe people are saying this is okay. Like A-Rod should be banished from baseball, the United States, from everywhere else on the planet because he lied.
Mm-hmm.
He had so many other people taken down in his wake. He was such a coward about it.
I agree.
And then he continued to make so much money off his next contract. Baseball should have come down so much harder on him. I don't know why he got the free pass. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I agree.
Well, now that he's the nice guy in the booth, it drives me even crazier. And that's not me hating him as a player even. That's just I can't stand to listen to him in the booth because he's so whiny.
Okay, so anybody who is connected to steroids, when I say connected, I mean tested positive and was suspended because David Ortiz is connected to steroids.
Yeah.
Because anybody who is
Sammy he was the best player out of like the funnest.
Oh yeah, no.
And he got slammed. He's like done.
Of course, yeah.
I am all in on players who were suspended for steroid use being banished from the game, but that's because there are procedures in place to get those players suspended and get those players banished. Where it is for Pete Rose is that there isn't a procedure for saying, oh, you gambled on baseball? Well, what do we do? There isn't like a suspension we can hand out. It's just a lifetime ban, or we allow you to keep playing. There isn't like a set rule like there is in baseball where if you get caught once with steroids, you get suspended 50 games, twice is 100 games, third is a lifetime ban. It's not like that for Pete Rose and for gambling. For Pete Rose, he was caught, and then they were like, okay, well, there's not really something we can do about it, so we're just going to ban you from the game. What I am so PO'd about in terms of Pete Rose's standpoint is that he is the all-time leader in hits. Man amassed over 4,300 hits. Okay, one of the greatest hitters of all time. He was hitting at a high level until he was in his mid-40s as a player coach. Hit from both sides of the plate. Stole bases when he was younger. Played elite defense in the infield. Yes, he's tied to gambling, but what he accomplished on the field should be his determining factor in him getting into the Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, Mark McGwire, and Sammy Sosa cheated on the field, and therefore they are ineligible for the Hall of Fame and the records that they hold. The home run leader, all-time home run leader, is Hank Aaron. The all-time home run leader is Hank Aaron. Barry Bonds, before he was on the Giants, was a Hall of Famer because he was a five-tool star.
A-Rod before steroids was a Hall of Famer.
Barry Bonds before the steroid era was a Hall of Famer. You just got to go back and look at his numbers when he was on the Pirates.
I love the fact that this is the show. Like this last 10 minutes has been the best part of the show. Where has this been our entire time? We've been way too nice to each other.
We're interviewing you. We were interviewing you.
Oh, that's fine. I would rather you contest everything that comes out of my mouth and say, where is your data coming from? How can you prove this stuff? Because here again, we're talking, you're now excusing Pete Rose for what he did. And even considering the fact that he was given a lifetime ban, which you can't go back on. Like once you're given it, I'm sorry, you can't just rescind it. It's like, it's there. For the steroid guys, they never gave each of those players a lifetime ban. They just sort of said, well, we're going to take our time and think about it. They did not ban them. So there's a chance those guys could still make the Hall of Fame, which I hope they don't.
Which is ridiculous. Yeah, I hope they don't.
Well, yeah.
I hope none of those steroid players do because, again, as a purist, it doesn't make any sense to reward those people that were the worst offenders. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows that they were cheating, and they can't even admit it to themselves.
Exactly.
Even if they had come out and said, oh, you're right, I've been using steroids for years. I feel bad about it. Maybe people would have a different perspective, but they haven't done that.
But again,
I would never support any of them, minus Sammy Sosa, not for Hall of Fame, but just because he was hilarious.
But first of all, and this is going back to Pete Rose, he gambled for his team to win. He never gambled for his team to outright lose. He
That's
didn't throw
what
a
he
game.
wants you to think.
But Joe Jackson threw a World Series.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly.
Look, again, we don't know these things because we're not Pete Rose, we're not the interviewers. We're like
those players from the Black Sox were never heard from again.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't this age of getting in contact with people.
Doesn't matter. My point is that have we come to a point in the society where rulings and things that we say mean nothing anymore, or things that we do have no consequence?
I mean, the argument can be made, yeah.
Are we going to say, okay, are we going to give up after a while and just say, Pete Rose, okay, the fact that you cheated, gambled on baseball, and ruined the sanctity of the sport for whatever teams that you were a part of, we don't know how long you were gambling on them for. And maybe you say you only did it for games that you were going to win, but there's no way to prove that you didn't. How can we accept that, okay it, and then let it slide to let him in the Hall? What does that say about the Hall of Fame then?
So are the 2017 Astros in the same boat?
Absolutely.
What?
I cannot. I mean, that every team has their own communication ways to let people know about what pitch is coming.
Yeah.
This is not new. This is just the first one that's been proven, and it got out. And yeah, so are all those players now ineligible for the Hall? Sure.
I think so, yeah.
Are they going to be forced to give their World Series title and rings up?
Probably not.
I think so. Like, why would you do that? Doesn't make any sense. Do you think they really care?
I think the MLB was too late on the players, but conversation for another day. I think we could talk about this forever, but if we want to release this episode on time, we got to cut the conversation off here. But Professor Sanders, it has been such a pleasure having you on. You can bet you will be back in this position sometime in the near future, most likely when we are back in the fall. Hopefully we have you in studio on WQAQ, because I feel like we would have so much more fun if we had a 2-hour time slot on live radio, because we would be able to play off each other a lot better. So
I'm also a lot more fun arguing in person. So if you ever want to have an argument on sports, wait till you're in studio.
That's what I'm saying, Mac. Maybe it's because you don't know me well enough yet, but I'm just telling you that you guys were way too polite to me. I was expecting a lot more pushback on a lot of the stuff that I was saying. So I will tell you next time I'll come ready.
Okay.
We will make you cry.
Don't go easy
on radio.
They do say I'm a sensitive guy, but I don't know about crying.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the Mac and Main show. Trip Sanders, he owns his business, Networking Simple. Go check him out you're on Facebook and Instagram?
LinkedIn mostly, so you can go follow him. Follow the Mac and Main show on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and then find us on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. For Jack Main, Steve McAvoy, and Trip Sanders, you have been listening to the Mac and Main show. Everybody stay safe and stay home.